So, I'm going to be reviewing every Yu-Gi-Oh anime and manga. I've been a long-time fan of this series, and I enjoy it just so much and I always want more. For most of the entries, I will be starting with the anime as that is what came first, but for the original, let's start with the manga. The original Yu-Gi-Oh manga is quite special and is honestly the most unique piece of Yu-Gi-Oh media due to how different it is from later entries. It's a game battle manga created by Kazuki Takahashi that ran for 343 chapters. It features many different games played in the beginning, not just Duel Monsters, and a lot of the fun of early chapters that don't move the plot is seeing the unique games popping up, which is always enjoyable. Of course, eventually Duel Monsters takes over as the main focus eventually, but it's still very enjoyable to see how Takahashi writes his duels. While it may not always make sense from a game standpoint, he does know how to craft a compelling narrative out of a card game. His art is also amazing. While it starts off sort of wonky, it quickly becomes one of my favorite styles in manga, with its extreme sharp edges and points. The story is quite good, and can roughly be broken down into 4 parts. The first is the part with the large hodgepodge of various games being played and the introduction of the character. Here we get some light shed on the mystery of the other Yugi and his relation to ancient Egypt, the beginning of Yugi's rivalry with Kaiba, and the introduction of the main villain, Yami Bakura. All of this being spread out among smaller chapters about individual games. While not every chapter is a win, enough of them are that this is a very enjoyable period of the manga. Next is the first truly long arc, Duelist Kingdom. Here we get the first long-standing antagonist, and while interesting things happen with Yugi, Jonochi, and even Bakura a bit, the other characters fall by the wayside. The duels in this part are quite wild, but it's honestly something I enjoy, to see how cool Takahashi makes them when completely unencumbered by real-life rules. After Duelist Kingdom, there's also a short arc of Dungeons, Dragons, and Dice, or Dungeon Dice Monsters in alternate translations, which is a nice short breather, and even gives some background on Yugi's grandfather, as well as containing a small scene that's actually integral to the final arc, which was nice to lend it some relevance. The third part is the largest arc of them all, Battle City. This one is honestly my favorite arc, and it has so much to offer. It introduces the Egyptian god cards and how absolutely iconic they are, as well as having my favorite duel of all time in Yugi vs Kaiba Round 4. The villains are also incredible. Yami Bakura is up to no good again and teams up with the main villain of the arc, Merrick, in order to make a great force against the heroes, leading to some amazing duels all around. While perhaps the Jonochi duels and the qualifiers aren't great, once the quarterfinals begin, there isn't a bad duel among the bunch. The various motivations of the characters all clash, and it's great to see how well that comes across in the duels. The final part is the Millennium World arc, and it's honestly a really fun ride. But you can see how rushed Takahashi was with it. Finally, all questions are answered here, and Yami Bakura's plan is finally paying off, and seeing interesting Ka battles with real monsters is definitely cool. The ceremonial duel at the end is easily in my top 3 duels of the franchise for just how well it shows off both Yugi and Atem, and ends on a very tear-jerking note. The characters in this manga are pretty good. Yugi and Atem have an interesting dynamic throughout the manga, and you can see the growth of both of them quite well. Jonochi is the lovable best friend doofus character who really improves, though I'm not too much of a fan of him. His arc with his sister's illness is nice though, if a bit cliche. Seto Kaiba is easily in my top 3 rivals in anything ever. Absolutely amazing, and of course he uses Blue Eyes White Dragon, my favorite ace monster. Yes, I'm basic. Anzu is okay as far as Yu-Gi-Oh girls go. She does some stuff throughout the series, though since she is not a duelist, she isn't partaking directly in the action for much of the series. Honda is a character that I do not understand why he was elevated to main character status, as beyond the Death Tea arc, he really does not contribute much in a narrative or dueling aspect. Pegasus was a good villain with a unique gimmick, making it interesting to play around his strategies, though his motivation was not the best. Merrick was an amazing villain with an understandable horrific backstory, pun intended. Yami Bakura is a great final villain who stuck around for quite a while. I loved his forte being tabletop RPGs and not card games, which made for 2 very unique arcs. It was always a wonder to try and know just what this guy was scheming, and his good side was a nice guy to have around as a friend for Yugi who also enjoyed games. The duels were pretty interesting and the monster's design was quite varied, which I enjoyed, but didn't lend to having distinguished archetypes that much. But everyone got a couple good monsters that got to be really cool, like Blue Eyes, Red Eyes, Gondora, and of course the Egyptian gods. Overall, I give the original Yu-Gi-Oh manga an 8 out of 10. Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 0 is a loose anime adaptation by Toei Animation that ran for 27 episodes. It roughly covers the events of the manga preceding Duelist Kingdom, and features some anime-only games as well. Personally, I am not too much of a fan of this anime series, as it changed around a lot of the stuff from the manga and added in its own filler episodes in such a short series. Also, for some weird reason, it turned Miho, a one-off love interest character for Honda, into a main character. Overall, I am glad the rights to make an anime adaptation were given to a different studio afterwards. 3 out of 10. There was also a Season 0 movie. It's nothing special, mostly just a battle over Yugi and Kaiba with the same Season 0 style, but hey, it gave us the whole Blue Eyes White Dragon is power, Red Eyes Black Dragon is potential slogan that Red Eyes players love. 4 out of 10. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters is an anime that was made by Studio Gallop that ran for 224 episodes. It mostly follows the manga starting from Duelist Kingdom, though there were some changes, mostly in toning down the violence from the manga. They also demoted Bakura from a friend of Yugi to just a side character, which I did not enjoy. The adaptation also added some minor filler episodes in between Duelist Kingdom and Dungeons, Dragons, and Dice, which were okay as they were pretty short. It greatly changed the Dungeons, Dragons, and Dice arc, however, removing any of the important moments from the manga and instead putting those into the Battle City arc. The Battle City arc is done okay in the manga, the qualifiers are done very well, but as it got on, the duels became very stretched out and featured a few filler episodes sprinkled in. This led to the first large filler arc, the Virtual World arc, which I honestly think is quite good. It had some fun duels, especially the Kaiba and Yugi vs Noah duel, gave some side characters some wins, and gave Kaiba some extra development, even if how it fit within the time frame of the show was sketchy. Unfortunately, due to the very different paces of manga and anime, it still had to really stretch out the Battle City finals, even though it still presented the duels themselves quite well. This meant that, after, they had to do another major filler arc, the Doma arc, which was okay. I didn't think it was great, but it was serviceable, and again had an amazing duel against Darts, the main villain, with Yugi and Kaiba together, and it gave Atem some development that, while a retread of the development he got in the manga, it was nice to see incorporated into the anime in some capacity. Of course, this was then followed up by another filler arc. This was just a standard fare of Kaiba putting on a tournament and everyone competing to win prize money, with some people holding a grudge against Kaiba showing up. It's alright, I suppose. They really changed the final arc, however, by adding modern-day Kaiba into the mix, and removing the tabletop RPG aspect, as well as just making the tertiary character Bobasa completely different for no reason. This is also around when the animation budget completely tanked, unfortunately. The openings for this anime were pretty good, especially the second and fifth ones. However, the endings were nothing special. Overall, I would give this adaptation a 7 out of 10. Yugioh R is a spin-off manga that touches on some of the hanging threads from the original manga. You get a zombie bandit Keith, and Pegasus' adopted son dueling Yugi for revenge, with some evil versions of the Egyptian god cards, which are different than the evil versions of the god card that will show up in GX. It's alright if you're craving more of the original characters. 7 out of 10. Pyramid of Light is a movie that aired during the original series. It is a pretty bland, just a rematch duel of Yugi and Kaiba that gets interrupted by a villain with a convoluted backstory that's not really explained in the movie itself. It has good animation, but not much else. 3 out of 10. Capsule Monsters is a 12-episode miniseries commissioned by 4Kids. It has a very weird animation style that's just slightly off, and is honestly just an incredibly strange Yu-Gi-Oh! Piece of I don't even know what to call this thing. 2 out of 10. The Dark Side of Dimensions is a 2016 film that takes place after the original manga. It's an interesting movie that really focuses on Kaiba more than Yugi, and provided some great moments for both. Tying Aigami, the villain, to the established lore with Bakura and Shadi was an interesting take that I did quite enjoy, and the animation was superb. Plus, this movie is just so extra. Space elevators, elaborate dueling holograms, summoning a god card you picked up off the ground. It's great. And it has my favorite card of all time, Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon. The Blue Eye Standing runs deep. 8 out of 10. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX is the anime sequel to Duel Monsters, that ran for 180 episodes. Though it is a sequel, it stars all new characters, though there are some cameos here and there from the original cast. This series is a completely Duel Monsters focused anime, which is fine as it pulls it off very well, in a unique if silly setting. Being set on an island school for duelists is great and gives reason as to why everyone resorts to card games even when things are low stakes. The first season spent its first half mostly just building its characters, which consists of the protagonist Judai, who is a lot more laid back and chill than Yugi, and uses what is my favorite deck for a protagonist, E-Heroes, which give him a lot of room to maneuver and provide different ways to win, which is fun. His roommate Sho, who is honestly just a huge loser, and Hayato, who is also a loser, but slightly less so. Neither of them use that interesting of decks. His rivals, Monjome, who has a great personal growth arc in the first season. He changes his deck quite a lot, but has some fun variants in there, especially once he finds his true deck of Ojamas. And Ryo, or Kaiser, who is the one to really challenge Judai. He uses a Cyber Dragon deck, which is quite fun to see in action. And the female character for this series is Asuka, who is okay. She has an arc about finding her brother, but it's not that great. though she does use a ritual deck, Cyber Angels, which means I love her. The second half of the first season is just about a group called the Seven Stars attempting to unleash the evil gods from beneath the school. It has some interesting parts, with one of them being Asuka's lost brother, and the reveal that one of them was the kind teacher Daitokuji all along, but the ending of it falls flat as it turns out the mastermind was a previously unheard of old man who just wanted the power to become young again, and really sucks at dueling. The second season introduces a new villain, Saikyo, a psychic who uses an Arcana deck. He is honestly a very compelling villain, especially after Season 1's extremely opaque and shallow villains, and a new rival for Judai, my man, Edo Phoenix, the most Chad character in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! To show up, who uses an amazing deck of D heroes, which is just E heroes, but better. Season 2 also introduces Kenzan, who is a dinosaur boy that uses a dinosaur deck. Not that interesting. The actual plot of the season is interesting in fighting against a psychic cult, but it's stretched over 50 episodes and that really weakened it. The third season of the show is where it really kicks up into high gear. It may be a meme to say, just wait, it gets good after 100 episodes, but damn if it isn't true. Season 3 introduces us to a bunch of new characters, from the Cloudian using spy Amon, the Fossil King Crocodile Cook, the kind of meh Austin O'Brien who uses Volcanics, and of course Johan who uses Crystal Beasts, which is a very interesting deck to see in action, and more importantly, he's Judai's boyfriend. However, the introduction of these characters does make the previous ones less relevant, unfortunately. This is easily the wildest season, featuring life energy being stolen, dimension traveling, people dropping dead left and right, and Judai having an extreme development as a character that I did not see coming but was absolutely amazing, and is why I feel disappointed every time I watch another happy-go-lucky character in anime for not having as good of an arc as Judai's. The villain this season is also absolutely wild, and whose relationship with Judai really provides a unique resolution to the arc after all the death and destruction. Yubel was also a fearsome opponent with their various deck changes through the season. Season 4 was a very good final arc. It tries to wrap up everyone's journeys and giving a very cool villain in Fujiwara and his Clear World deck, which is still one of my favorites. While it is a shorter season, it provides a great send-off to the characters, including Judai, which really shows just how much he's grown. The ceremonial duel against Yugi is also amazing, a very fun way to end a sequel series. The openings are pretty good for the most part, with only the first one being a weak link. The endings aren't that interesting visually, but they have great music accompanying them. GX is my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, and I give it a 10 out of 10. The GX manga is like a cool alternate universe version of GX, which is the style that most Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga would take going forward. It ran for 64 chapters, and then a special bonus chapter released much later after the ending. It is also very good, though much more straightforward in terms of plot compared to the anime. Most of the secondary characters from the anime are relegated to one-off appearances, which isn't bad, as the ones that it does focus on get a lot better treatment. The art is good, though not quite as good as in the original, and this really puts Monjome as the second most important character and rival to Judai. It gives him a new deck too, focusing on dragons, and a really cool Ace and Light and Darkness dragon, and Judai's masked heroes are great as well. Monjome's development is honestly really refreshing after seeing the anime where he becomes a joke over time. The final duel is even a 2 versus 1 of Judai and Monjome together. The beginning of the manga is really setting up the basic plot elements, which is good, and I like Judai's mentor relationship too, which is unique compared to his anime counterpart. The second half, with a lot of cameos from the later GX seasons, was nice too, and the tournament was amazing. Easily the second best tournament in the franchise, after Battle City. Overall, it's nice, short, and sweet manga that gives some love to GX characters. 8 out of 10. Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds is a loose sequel to GX, taking place far in the future in a sci-fi setting. It ran for 154 episodes. This is a series that really showed off how amazing strategy can be with Yu-Gi-Oh!, as it is easily at its height here. The first third of the show mainly focuses around the main heroes, who are all part of the Signers, fighting against the Dark Signers in South American themed battles. It also introduces synchro summoning, and pulls it off quite well, even if I will forever be a ritual and fusion stan. It also introduces the 5Ds versions of riding duels, which in the first season do not really change much aside from being on motorcycles, and they do add another layer of strategy when the alternate rules appear in the latter part of the series. The core characters are amazing in this one. Yusei is a great protagonist, even if he is quite Gary Stu-ish, and his strategies are always amazing to see with his Synchro Warrior deck, even if I found the actual monster designs quite ugly. His rival Jack is also a pretty great character, though in rival terms, not so much. His Red Dragon deck is great to see in action every time he duels. Aki is easily the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Girl from a completed Yu-Gi-Oh! At the time of this video. Amazing design, and her plant deck is beautiful to watch in action. Luca and her non-signer twin brother Lua are cool kid characters as well. but of course, they don't contribute nearly as much as the older characters. There's also Crow, who becomes a signer partway through the story. He's easily my least favorite of the heroes though, and his Blackwing deck isn't that interesting either. While some of the Dark Signer villains are memorable, some are pretty unique, like Carly, Jack's love interest, who gives him a pretty interesting matchup, but sadly afterwards becomes an irrelevant character, and Kiryu, who is a deceased former friend of Yusei, and who has an amazing Infernity deck. The final boss for the first third, Rex Godwin, is an interesting villain and gives a cool 3 versus 1 duel, even if I'm still salty that Crow took part and not Aki. The middle third is where it really slows down, with a lot of episodes that don't contribute to anything, with a meandering plot for the most part. The villains Iliaster show up, have a cool Mech Lord deck, but spend a lot of time sitting in the background. Two more important characters are introduced, Sherry LeBlanc, who aside from being the most beautiful, has a cool Sacred Knight floor deck that uses fusion, so of course I stan, and a very personal involvement in attempting to defeat Iliaster, and of course, Yusei's boyfriend, Bruno. While I'm not a fan of his TG deck, he does provide some great tools for Yusei, and of course, teaches him the absolutely iconic Clear Mind. The intrigue that these new characters exhibit is enough to carry through the episodes where the plot isn't moving forward very much. There's also a mini arc spliced in between that's a combo Cowboy and Kiryu redemption arc. It's very hit or miss, but personally, I like it. Then the second tournament arc of the series really starts up, and while the first few team duels aren't much, once Team Ragnarok shows up, the show really picks back up. Having another magically destined group show up was cool to see as a narrative dynamic. And then the Arc Cradle happens, which is honestly my favorite arc in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Every duel from that point is top tier, and the penultimate duel against Zone is probably my second favorite in the whole franchise. If only they didn't cop out of the twist, it probably would have been my favorite overall. The ceremonial duel of Yusei against Jack was okay, but unfortunately didn't display much for either of them, though the cutaways to the future did give a nice button on each of the Team 5D's character stories. The openings for 5Ds are amazing, each one both great musically and visually, and the endings are great too for the most part, with only one that I wouldn't consider great. Overall, while I would say that 5Ds is probably the best Yu-Gi-Oh! Series objectively, to me, it just loses out to GX. 9 out of 10. Once Beyond Time is a movie technically set during 5Ds, but, you know, time travel. It is pure fan service of all the three protagonists at this point teaming up to defeat a time-traveling villain. They all summon their aces, have cool moments with each other, and get sent on their way. On the one hand, it is so devoid of actual content that it doesn't seem good, but the pure surface level it gives is so amazing that I love it. 7 out of 10. The Yugioh 5D's manga is another alternate universe setting from the anime, and it ran for 68 chapters. The main cast from the anime is vastly different here, as are the format of the writing duels. With quite a varied multitude of character differences and backstories, you get a lot more interesting dynamics in this manga. The manga also gives a mentor relationship that's important, but here Yusei is the mentor to a new character, Sect. This dynamic does pretty well, and you can see the manga took a lot of influence from the better parts of the anime. These all come to a head in the finale tournament arc, which played out in a great way due to the various duels and relationships to the past, which yes, is treading old ground for Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it still pulls it off. It's a great manga, but not quite as good as its anime counterpart. 8 out of 10. Yugioh Zale is the next Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime after 5Ds, and it ran for 146 episodes. This series introduces Xyz summoning, which they definitely pull off visually within the show. However, the strategy level has been lowered from 5Ds, so overall the duels aren't as engaging as they once were. The series starts off with the protagonist Yuma meeting his spirit companion for the show, Astral, then going on a meandering quest to find all the number cards in order to unlock Astral's memories. Yuma's deck changes a lot throughout the show, and while his monsters have good visual design, it's just not that interesting to see strategy-wise. The beginning introduces a lot of minor friend characters for Yuma who are mostly unimportant, as well as the female lead Kotori, who was a non-duelist character, which honestly turned out alright since it led with the expectation that she wouldn't do much, so when she does do something, it seems cool. We also get introduced to Yuma's two rivals. First, Shark, who fittingly uses an Xyz Water Shark deck, and is an okay character but never quite does the rival part very well, and Kaito, who is absolutely the best character in the show, and easily has the greatest duels in Zale with his Photon deck, and is the source of most of the enjoyment in the first half of Zale. The villains of the first half, Tron and his children with his Heraldic deck, and Dr. Faker with his garbage deck, not an insult, that's just the actual deck name, are pretty meh, staying behind the scenes for most of it and acting through proxies. The first half of Zale is honestly quite bad, to the point where I had dropped it several times while trying to make it through, though I am glad I did make it through, as the second half is much, much better. The second half of the show really ramps up on the interdimensional war aspect of the show, and introduces the Barians, which are a great antagonist group, especially with two of them being friends of Yuma's, Shark, and his sister Rio, another being Vector, who masqueraded as a friend to Yuma, because goddamn, that boy evil. It all leads to some insanely great final duels, especially against the final boss, Dawn 1000, who is perhaps the most broken deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime history. The ceremonial duel of Yuma against Astral is good also, though it does feel very similar to the Yugi and the Tem ceremonial duel. The series also ends with a "and the journey continues" type of ending, which I usually don't like, but for characters this young, it fits. The openings and endings vary throughout, with some great and some terrible musically, but with good visuals throughout. The two halves of Zexal vary wildly in how good they are, so overall I would give Zexal a 6 out of 10. The Yugioh R manga is again an alternate universe type of story compared to the anime. It ran for 55 chapters. The beginning of it does actually follow the anime, or more accurately, the anime follows the beginning of the manga, as the manga released a couple chapters before the anime began, but diverges afterwards. The manga's take on what the number cards are, and the villains who use them, were much better. Kyoji was a great addition as a manga-only character, with his relation to Shark. And Luna was a surprisingly good character too, given her gender and the writer of the manga. Era was a great final villain, and delivered an amazing final duel to Yuma, Kaito, and Kyoji. Overall, it's a nice take on the Zale world. I give it a 7 out of 10. Team Zexal is a gag manga that ran for 24 chapters. It's just a manga for teaching kids how to duel and is extremely silly. Harmless, but definitely not my cup of tea. 2 out of 10. Yugioh R 5 is the next series after Zale, and it ran for 148 episodes. I'm gonna be upfront with this one. It's the worst anime I've ever seen. Saikyo Duelist Yuya is another comedy-focused— I'm just kidding, I can't leave the Arc 5 anime review at that. So, the Arc 5 anime follows Yuya, who uses a Pendulum Magician deck, which has good design visually, but as for the strategy, well, I'll explain later. Yuya is searching for his missing father, along with his best friend Yuzu, who uses the Melodious deck, which again is quite well designed, as are most of the monsters in Arc 5. Well, in the first episode, Yuya creates Pendulum Summoning, which, well, far from my favorite, is an alright mechanic in and of itself. And it also introduces action duels, which aren't that bad in Season 1, but quickly become terrible, as their only use is to stop attacks or keep monsters on the field. Easily the worst gimmick in Yu-Gi-Oh! Season 1 also introduces us to Reiji, the rival, who honestly is the best character in the show with his DDD deck. I sure hope there are no issues with his voice actor making him barely appear for most of the series. It also introduces a lot of other characters who seemed really interesting, but like most things in the show, ended up being barely relevant. Someone who is, for some reason, is Reiji's little brother, who kinda just tags along. It becomes clear in Season 1 that there's an interdimensional war going on, and that Yuya and Yuzu have counterparts to themselves in each of the other 3 dimensions. One of you just dies right away. Luckily there's 4 nominally important female characters in the show, so one of them's gotta turn out to be good, right? Season 2 takes us to the Synchro Dimension, which isn't that interesting, but hey, it's Jack and Crow, characters everyone loves from 5Ds. But yeah, no, it's actually just characters who look like them and use similar cards, but they're not the same as the ones from 5Ds. Oh, but riding duels are back. Surely those will be— oh no, they're riding action duels now. Anyway, they spent a chunk of time in prison because that's definitely an interesting thing to have your characters do and it's not at all a narrative cul-de-sac. And they're mostly confined to their hotel rooms while they're not dueling in a tournament, because why would you want your characters to interact? Anyways, they defeat the CEO of Classism and move on to the Xyz and Fusion dimensions. They bring back Kaito, but he's not the Kaito from Zale, and Edo and Asuka, but not the ones from GX, and also the ones from GX are irrelevant. Some lame minor villains are fought, and we learn that everyone who died can come back, which we all expected anyways, but now there's not even a semblance that is permanent. Anyway, the 4 versions of the protagonists all form into one and become the main villain, who then defeats everyone no problem, including the man, Leo Akaba, who was the hyped up main villain for about 100 episodes, but again became completely irrelevant. He also ended up beating a bunch of other characters who are so unimportant that I never mentioned them in this review. Then the tertiary younger brother of Reiji shows up, Reira, who absorbs the souls of all the female characters and beats the villain. So you would think it would be time for a ceremonial duel, but you'd be wrong. Instead, the next 10 or so episodes are just Yuya going around dueling a handful of side characters with the goal of making baby Reira smile, which will therefore mean the trans-dimensional supervillain will never be evil again. Again, the final 10 episodes are about making a baby smile. This isn't even getting into the various plot holes, wasted characters, character development followed by complete character regression. It's just a very disappointing series because it had so much potential and completely squandered it. 0 out of 10. Oh, but the openings and endings were good except for the final one, so there's that. Saikyo Duelist Yuya, for real this time, is another comedy-focused manga similar to Team Zexal and ran for 15 chapters. Again, it's just a jokey short manga for kids, 2 out of 10. The archive manga is, as many people who read it will tell you, better than the anime. Doesn't exactly make it good though. It definitely treated most of its characters better, especially with the redesign it gives Yuya. It does feel extremely rushed, however. Instead of multiple dimensions like the anime, its sci-fi gimmick is time travel, which it actually handles alright. It makes for a cool set of villains, and quite a funny ending gag for the manga. However, it also provided probably the most disrespectful ceremonial duel I have ever seen to one of the best characters, Reiji, and I don't understand why. 4 out of 10. Yugioh Vrains is the next anime after Arc 5, and it ran for 120 episodes. It is in a sci-fi setting again, this time focusing on virtual reality, which led to some great monster designs. The series follows Yusaku, who uses a cyber deck filled with great-looking monsters, seeking revenge against the Knights of Hanoi, who kidnapped and abused him as a child. Vrains also introduces speed duels as an alternate format occasionally used in the series, which is an interesting way to show off a duel. The strategy level in Vrains is high once again, with a lot of depth given to them, though some people see this as a negative, as it does make most duels go on for a long time, though it's something I enjoyed. It also introduced link summoning, which, while visually interesting, did feel a bit stifling during the Vrains era of rules around it. Vrains is a great rival character in Revolver with his rocket deck, and an interesting past relationship to Yusaku. Yusaku also gets an AI companion named I, who provides some nice comic relief throughout the series. The first season also introduces us to Go, the man with the worst hair in Yu-Gi-Oh! And his boring Goki deck, and Aoi, who seemed really cool and had one of my favorite deck, Trickstars, but unfortunately had the misfortune of being a female character in the Shin Yoshida show, something even 2 dramatic costume changes couldn't help. Yusaku is able to stop the Knight of Hanoi's plans at the end of Season 1, and the next season instead focuses on the AIs like I, who are plotting to take over the world due to their inability to coexist with humanity. It sounds like quite an interesting premise, but unfortunately it's a dull season, introducing Soulburner, who is really just an orange Yusaku, who is somehow even more of a Gary Stu, and uses the Salaman Great deck, which is not that interesting to see visually due to its main gimmick being resummoning the same monster. And the AI who ends up becoming the main villain of the season, Bowman, who is quite a stoic character and uses Hydra Drives, a deck which started off semi-interesting but became quite boring due to heavy overuse. The third season takes a very interesting turn in I becoming the main villain, for what is eventually revealed to be due to his knowledge that a war between humans and AIs would otherwise be inevitable. And the final season does feature some great duels, such as the ceremonial duel between Soulburner and Revolver. But due to production issues, it is quite a short season that really needed more room to breathe. The openings and endings were alright, but each overstayed their welcome. 7 out of 10. And that is every finished Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, but for Lark, let's just see some of the currently running ones. Again, these are very tentative ratings, as who knows, these series could get a lot better in the second half, like, say, Zale did, or they can get a lot worse going forward like Arc 5 did. The OCG Structures manga is one that is very focused on shilling the card game to the point of skipping a lot of the dueling action that may not be as enticing to younger readers, and featuring more low stakes and scale narratives. It's fine if that's something you're looking for, but with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not what I'm here for. 2 out of 10. Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s is the first anime made by a non-Gallop studio since Season 0, and it really shows. The aesthetics are quite different from what we're used to, but they pull it off well. It introduces rush dueling for, so far, all of its duels, which means that the strategy is much lower, but visually makes for exciting duels. It also introduces maximum summoning, which is a very cool way to have a super form of normal summoning, and has led to some great monster designs. It is a much faster paced anime comparatively, with each arc wrapping up in 13 episodes, and all are about the series protagonist Yuga promoting his rush duel creations and countering enemy people, mostly from the Goha Corporation, who wish to destroy them. It features some great characters and internal lore, so I would tentatively give it an 8 out of 10. The Yu-Gi-Oh! 7's manga is quite similar to the anime, except it has the best friend character of Rook as the protagonist instead of Yuga, which is a fun way to do an alternate take on a series. Currently, I would give it a 7 out of 10. And there you have it, folks, a review of every Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. I'm sure everyone watching this video disagrees with at least one part of it, but hey, it's just my opinion, and I'm sure you'll let me know yours down in the comments.